Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal.
You know, it's one thing to be ignorant. Everybody's ignorant naturally about certain things. We're born into the world ignorant about everything. And through study and learning and applying ourselves and through a willing mind and an open heart, etc., objective spirit and objective study, we conquer much of our ignorance and we learned truth.
The skyline of San Francisco looking more like an image from Mars. The orange glow from wildfires burning miles away, shrouding the city's landmarks, the smoke blocking out the sun. The middle of the day felt like dusk, and it is unnerving. And those fires continue to rage across the western United States, driven on by strong, dry winds, burning more of California this year than ever before.
You can barely make out the sun in the sky. That's how much smoke is here. It's literally like the surface of Venus. It's down this road. Let's go take a look. I felt compelled to show just how dry it is. This region's several hundred inches of rain short since 2007. Very few people want to talk about that or admit that. Where you see the tree line start, that's where the high water line is for the lake. You can see in front of me, the lake is empty. Patriotism starts with the courage to face the truth and address very real and immediate challenges. Very few people are willing to do that. But will that stop people from trying to pretend nothing is wrong and having fun until the brutal bitter end, ignoring the wider horizon and pretending they have no part in what happens, in the outcome on our dying planet? This is what it's like, even in this location. Take a good look. Certainly many good people that are just not aware of what's going on in the wider horizon, but what will it take, I would ask, to make them aware? What will it take? How bad does it have to get before there's some focus on addressing what's left of the planet's life support systems and what it will take to salvage those systems, while there's anything left to salvage?
It's part of that engineering mentality that we are going to impose our will upon the Earth. We're going to make the entire planet into our engineering project. The result will be unintended consequences, as always. And these unintended consequences will be horrific. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, I could say a couple things that could go wrong. If we increase the reflectivity of the sky to sunlight, then you're kind of locked into this technological maintenance of the world forever.
Engineering is a term used to describe large-scale targeted intervention in the Earth's atmosphere, the oceans, and the biosphere. There are two basic directions that technological manipulation of the climate could take. Solar radiation management is the process of reflecting the sun's rays back into space, with the result that the climate heats up less. At this time, none of the relevant technologies actually exist. There are pilot projects for some, but others remain purely theoretical in nature. Their effects, however, could have devastating consequences. Regarding solar radiation management, one technology in particular is the subject of research, so-called stratospheric aerosol injection. This might, for example, involve large numbers of aircraft scattering large quantities of particles, such as sulfur dioxide, into one specific layer of the atmosphere, namely the stratosphere.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
We'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the Earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
It seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
The particles would then act as a reflective filter, throwing a percentage of solar radiation back into space, and thereby preventing it from heating up the atmosphere in the first place.
Something strange going on in the skies of southern Queensland in the past day.
Good afternoon, Katrina. Yes, we've started seeing some mysterious echoes appearing on the radar. Now, they started late yesterday afternoon over the Darling Downs with trails of blue sweeping across the southeast during the evening and overnight before it all dissipated early this morning. So, what is it? Well, it's not weather-related. Skies were clear last night and there was no rain recorded anywhere. Now, one theory is that it's a thing called chaff, small metal or plastic fibres released into the air to help shield military aircraft from radar detection during exercises. No one has confirmed that, but these streams here are consistent with something being released in the upper atmosphere over the downs, then being swept across the southeast by strong winds. Interesting nonetheless.
The objective is thus to artificially cool down the global climate. But what would be the effects on our planet of such a large-scale technological experiment? These could be devastating. It is unlikely that cooling of the planet could be achieved in a uniform way. SAI would therefore produce regional winners and losers.
A wild accusation from Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He says Western countries are causing drought in certain parts of the world, including Iran. He says they're using high-tech equipment to drain raindrops from clouds. Yes, that is what he said. He basically says European countries are stealing rain from Iran for their own use.
But the former commercial pilot isn't some adrenaline junkie courting danger. He's a cloud seeder, chasing this menacing storm to squeeze out extra rain for the drought-stricken farmland below. This is Craig's job, firing chemicals into the clouds in a controversial attempt to modify the weather. He's literally a rainmaker.
As a consequence of this rain, and of course, when farmers make money, we're all better off. And this is $1 billion rain for our ag community. So I want to thank the people in charge for making that rain available. Keep up the great work.
Was wir nicht als Regen oder Schnee identifizieren können, hier im Westen diese Schlangenlinien, das haben wahrscheinlich am Nachmittag über der Nordsee ein paar Flugzeuge, Militärflugzeuge rausgebracht. Und in etwa 5 bis 6 Kilometer Höhe hat mit Wetter so nichts zu tun.
منطقه اروپا منطقه پربارشی است. اما اومدن با تجهیزاتی که دارن ابرها رو تخلیه کردن. شما میدونید جریان حرکت ابرها از غرب به شرق. یعنی میاد از روی اقیانوس شکل میگیره، میاد روی مدیترانه، هوا تغییرات درش اتفاق میفته، میاد عبور میکنه از ایران و میره به سمت شرق. اخباری داشتیم که در اروپا دارن این کارو میکنن، یعنی دارن ابرها رو تخلیه میکنن که به سمت ما نرسه.
The total global rainfall would be less. In Asia, SAI could upset the complex system governing the monsoon, on which the water and food supply of 2 billion people depends.
Now, China is using artillery to fight its drought. Weather officials fired rockets and shells filled with cloud-seeding chemicals into the sky. Chinese authorities hope to create a little bit of rain, easing the worst drought they've seen in decades. Emily Chang has the story.
The problem is that many farms in China still rely heavily on rainfall to water their crops. Irrigation systems are poor. So over the weekend, China brought out the big guns, literally rockets loaded with cloud-seeding chemicals, fired those chemicals into the clouds to make it rain. But those clouds are thin and moving out of the drought-stricken area, so that's only going to be a short-term fix.
Countries all over the world have experimented with different ways to squeeze rain out of the clouds. China spends more on cloud seeding than any other country in the world.
This is an image of cloud seeding that China conducted last year. Its purpose was to create cloud condensation to increase the amount of precipitation as a way to fight air pollution. A cloud seeding experiment will soon be conducted in Korea as well. Several cloud seeding experiments have been conducted in the inland regions of Korea before, but the upcoming experiment will take place in the skies over the west coast of Korea to check if cloud seeding can block smog from China. First, a meteorological aircraft will disperse silver iodide in the clouds before measuring changes in the amount of precipitation. Simultaneously, reductions in dust concentration will be analyzed via marine and land monitoring networks.
국민적 관심이 미세먼지와 인공 중에 많이 있기 때문에 그걸 고려해서 환경부와 협업을 통해서 인공 강우 물질을 살포해서 강수 입진 변화와 미세먼지 저감 효과 분석까지도 같이.
Instead, Beijing's 17 million residents woke up to surprisingly heavy snow Sunday morning. But this first snowstorm of the season had plenty of human help, according to Beijing's Weather Modification Office. They claim that clouds seeded with 186 doses of silver iodide greatly enhanced the snowstorm. Northern China has been in a major drought, and the government thinks cloud seeding could bring relief to this major wheat-growing region. But Beijing's snow gain may be a big loss for other parts of the country. Some of their needed precipitation may have been diverted to China's capital city by order of the Weather Modification Office.
It could also lead to droughts in sub-Saharan Africa, while causing flooding.
Roads and villages turned into rivers overnight, and tens of thousands displaced.
Our homes are submerged now, and we can only access the area by boat.
After months of drought, the heavy rains are now destroying what was left of people's crops and livestock. Malnutrition and a threat of diseases like cholera and malaria are now on the rise. Many areas in central and southern Somalia have been completely cut off, and people here are now in urgent need of aid.
It's a different story in southern Africa, where many parts of the region have been hit with a devastating drought. In Zimbabwe, animals have been affected the most as the lack of rain dries up water holes and grazing areas. More than 100 elephants have died in Zimbabwe's wildlife reserves since September.
We've seen it more times than anyone can count. Flash flood deluges, dropping trillions of gallons of water, seemingly out of nowhere and often ending just as abruptly.
Parts of northern Europe have continued to be lashed by torrential rain, bringing extensive flooding to Belgium, Germany and France. Paris has never experienced so much rain in May since records began in 1873. Scenes like this along the River Seine have been known in winter, but not in June, although it's not putting some people off. This is not a river or a canal, but a motorway, the A10 near Orléans. Hundreds of people became stranded on Wednesday. The army intervened to take them to emergency centres. Remaining in their cars, obviously not an option. In some parts of northern France, getting around is a question of improvisation. Streets are no longer streets, but canals. Fire crews have been called out hundreds of times, having no other option but to travel by boat. As much rain fell in 24 hours as normally falls in the whole of May. In December 99, the River Lave reached 3 meters 31. Now we've beaten the record, 3 meters 42, 11 centimeters higher. A summer's day in Prague. Tourists come here from around the world to stroll across the medieval Charles Bridge. On Tuesday afternoon, they were forced to run for cover. The Czech capital was one of several European cities hit by heavy thunderstorms. This was the scene at the weekend in the southwestern German town of Braunsbach. Whole parts of the centre were simply washed away, the water carrying with it anything in its path. In some streets, the damage looks more like the aftermath of an earthquake. The floodwaters having subsided, residents have been trying to clear the rubble and mud and survey the destruction inside their homes. This man fears his business may have suffered damage costing €1 million. Within 5 minutes, the water levels rose from nothing to a stream, an incredible stream. And the worst thing is, we don't understand how this could happen. We don't know.
Residents in southern Tasmania are demanding to know why cloud seeding was conducted over the Derwent River catchment the day before the worst floods in 40 years. Cloud seeding is a technique used to increase rain. Hydro Tasmania has confirmed it flew a cloud seeding flight despite the weather warnings. Farmers believe the technique could have made the flooding worse. The Premier says a formal inquiry will be held into the effect and handling of the floods if it's necessary.
As for further unpredictable side effects of large-scale climate manipulation, these might become apparent only after it had been implemented.
Here in southern Oregon and northern California, we've got a bit of an unusual situation. Now, this first portion of the radar cycle, fairly bland and typical, but then you see these bands of very distinct cloud cover moving into the region. That is not rain, that is not snow, believe it or not. Military aircraft flying through the region dropping chaff. Small bits of aluminum, sometimes it's made of plastic or even metallicized paper products, but it's used as an anti-radar issue, and obviously they're up there practicing. Now, they won't confirm that, but I was in the Marine Corps for many years, and I'll tell you right now, that's what it is.
I'm dealing a lot with some military activity in terms of chaff anyway, and that's something that I experienced for the first time yesterday. That was a whole lot of fun, and that's where the military just basically dumps some of the tiny particles of plastic or metal mylar into the atmosphere, and basically they do this when we do already have weather in the area, because it's been around since as long as radar has been around, because that's the shot from yesterday's 6 o'clock show. What they do is try to confuse ground-based Doppler radar systems, and as Mark put it so kindly, ground-based meteorologists. And yes, ladies and gentlemen of the armed forces, it worked well.
Remember, we were talking about military chaff. Basically, it's the Canadian military doing some exercises, airplane exercises out here. And what they're doing is they're dropping chaff, which is basically like a mylar material that's expected to fool missiles. So it's just a military exercise, but it's interesting to see that chaff show up on the radar. And, last winter, I believe, it was showing up in the Western Mountain region. But pretty cool to see that as well. It's nice and quiet out there. These are the things you can talk about on the radar.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our
greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling, irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country. Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
They're in fact reading from a script.
I can't believe you said that.
All right. Government organizations have all their weather predictions modeling done by Raytheon, a massive private defense contractor for our government that's neck deep in climate engineering patents. Are our meteorologists simply reading scripts? Why won't they address public concerns? Lab tests from around the globe have long since proven a mountain of heavy metals like aluminum, barium, and strontium are raining down on all of us. These metals are the primary elements named in climate engineering patents. Yes, this is connected to the dirty, dingy, often checkerboard striped toxic mess that we see in our skies day in and day out. If you don't believe it, doesn't matter. You're still breathing this contamination with every breath, and it's building up in your body. Several dozen lab tests from Shasta and Siskiyou counties alone, about 70, I believe, prove this beyond any shadow of a doubt. Why aren't we being told? Why don't meteorologists and institutions like the Weather Channel say a word about climate engineering?
We got to get serious because we got the news to do, man.
Because they're owned by corporations like Blackstone and Bain Capital, corporations all connected to the umbilical of the global power structure. Does anyone believe the paid actors at the Weather Channel would tell the truth about climate engineering? Let's ask the meteorologists at the National Weather Service or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, but no again, because virtually all the National Weather Service and NOAA government employees are still under a federal gag order. Don't believe me, please investigate it for yourself.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do.
One of the biggest concerns since Kilauea's eruptions began in Leilani Estates last week is air quality. Sulfur dioxide levels in the area remain very high, and officials warn that exposure to high levels of the gas is very harmful.
There was a question about the health hazard of sulfur, and David mentioned it before too. Proposals for geoengineering think about putting 5 or 10 billion tons of sulfur per year, gigatons, teragrams of sulfur. Is that right? Five teragrams.
The biggest thing that's in the news this last week is the sulfur dioxide, which when it's mixed up with the oxygen in the air and the water that we have plenty of in Hawaii and the sunlight, they become sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid, from all the way back to high school, you remember, is the acid that actually can cause irritation, can burn your skin, but when you inhale them, it can actually cause the same damage inside your lungs. In addition to that, there's also different kind of particles like glass, tiny little called silica, that actually can also cause permanent damage in the future as well in the lungs.
Many plants and animals, as well as human societies, would be unable to adapt to such rapid climate change. To prevent a termination shock, the particles would have to be distributed continuously over decades, centuries, or even millennia. Not only would this require many millions of tons of sulfur, it would also make humanity dependent on the functioning of a large-scale technological manipulation of the climate.
When humans put about 100 teragrams of SO2 into the atmosphere through pollution in places that are really badly polluted, like in China now, suffer from that. And the health aspects of that are really bad.
The Beijing-Tianjin-Hebei region, known as Jing-Jin-Ji, has the highest level of air pollution in China. Particularly during winter, the region is often engulfed in heavy smog lingering for days and posing a serious health threat.
That was one of my original reasons that it might be a bad idea, too much more acid rain, but I've crossed that off because it doesn't seem to be, that's not really one of the concerns about geoengineering.
Can I leap in? This is a really important moral point. So if I made a decision, or if there was a collective decision to do a geoengineering program, and you put, say, the kind of program I think makes more sense to put about 1 million tons a year in, but let's say, you might end up killing many tens of thousands of people a year as a direct result of that decision. I think that has moral consequences. I don't sweep it under the rug. So this is a case where I take this much differently from Alan and think it's a much more serious issue. Now, it's true that as part of doing that, you would hope that the overall benefits of human mortality would be so that you would save many, many more people than that. But the fact that you would save more people than you killed doesn't mean there's no moral impact of making a decision that directly kills people. And I think that we who talk about this have a duty to be clear-eyed about the direct risks involved in doing it.
I've got some exciting news to share with you. 12 new cloud types have just been added to the International Cloud Atlas, the first update to the atlas in 31 years. You may have some questions. Where were these clouds hiding for the past 3 decades?
Man-made clouds could be built as part of a 5-year plan to save the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef Foundation today revealed how it will spend $444 million in federal funding. $10 million will be spent on controlling crown of thorns starfish and another $10 million on improving water quality. It will also look at innovative ideas like fake clouds.
An enormous amount of hydrogen and oxygen gets mixed together. As a result, these engines are basically pumping water vapor into the atmosphere. After about an hour, this water vapor will eventually fall back down as rain.
Clouds can have dramatic effects on our climate, influencing the locations and severity of floods and droughts, and even the temperature of our planet as a whole. So by understanding clouds, we can better predict severe storms, the global distribution of fresh water, and the course of climate change. But what exactly are clouds, and how do they form?
The reality we're all supposed to believe in which weather modification is crazy science fiction stuff. And what are you talking about? That's insane. And then there's the reality in which not only the CIA, but various other branches of the US government and one can presume scientific organizations from around the world have been seriously studying this idea for, at the very least, decades. And again, we don't have to speculate about that. There's ample historical documentary evidence of that.
If you ever wonder where the rain comes from, here it is. This is Lamar County, some kind of power plant. They're using wet surface air coolers, and they're generating clouds like you would not believe.
Consider the level of purpose that we can find in facing these challenges head on. Not hiding from them, but facing them head on. And that is, in fact, the only place solace lies in the kinds of scenarios we find ourselves in now. And if people would abandon the sort of false, unhelpful, and in many ways destructive programming that has been a core part of our society, that life is about your personal pursuit of pleasure, and if anything interferes with that, you should be miserable. That's not what life was about. And if people re-examine their sense of responsibility toward the greater good, because what we face is indeed existential threats. That's what people need to understand. These are absolutely near-term existential threats. But if we consider the part we could play in turning the tide of the Titanic on which we're all currently passengers,
right,
great solace, great sense of purpose exists in that, does it not?
Right. Right. And I feel the same way about geoengineering. We're fighting it, hopefully to win, but we're fighting it regardless what happens, because it is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to fight, because they're destroying our planet and ourselves.
With such great risks and regionally divergent effects, how should an international consensus for its implementation ever be reached and maintained over centuries? And if no consensus is possible in the first place, who would come out on top, setting the global thermostat to suit their own interests? How would those who are most vulnerable to the negative impact make their voice heard? Any application of solar radiation management that is not coordinated on an international scale would have disastrous consequences for world security and could lead to conflict. The use of such technology as a weapon is also a real risk. Not least because economically and militarily powerful states are the ones that have the infrastructure and resources to carry out large-scale interventions in the climate.
The government, anxious not to be blamed, closed the project down and denied it had ever taken place.
Imagine a weapon that could affect the entire planet, and yet you could launch an attack against an enemy and they wouldn't even know it. Military planners imagined loading the clouds with radiological, biological, or chemical agents and having them rain on demand. Some said, if you control the weather, you can control the world.
The belief was that you could attack your enemy using the weather, but deny ever doing so. Experiments in Vietnam continued for 5 years until in 1972, a leak from the White House blew the cover on Project Popeye. Allegations were made that cloud seeding had not only made jungle paths impassable, it had also killed thousands of innocent people.
When Project Popeye was revealed in the press, it caused an immediate firestorm of criticism. People were concerned at the time that we had opened this Pandora's box of evil, and we really didn't know where it would lead us to.
Project Popeye had opened the door to a new and dangerous type of warfare. The firestorm it created led to an international treaty banning all use of weather modification for military purposes. But this didn't stop governments from continuing to explore ways of modifying the weather, sometimes for highly questionable purposes.
The military has spent a huge amount of time on weather modification as a concept for battle environments. Most people don't know, but the United States signed treaties with the former Soviet Union and 60 other countries in the mid-1970s where we agreed not to use geophysical manipulation as weapons of war. Presently, the treaties only allow us to do that within the boundaries of our own country. The reality is you can't contain weather by artificial boundaries.
And now we're learning that scientists and researchers are looking at how to change the weather on purpose. That's right. Lasers now could one day manipulate rain and lightning. CBS This Morning contributor Michio Kaku is a physics professor at City College of New York. Professor, nice to see you. Extraordinary seeing Al Gore and Bill Clinton there together with Charlie, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, they did not get into this discussion,
no.
though. But it is fascinating. I mean, lasers, really, to change the weather?
That's right. Well, as Mark Twain once famously said, everyone complains about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it.
The basic building blocks of climate engineering are to saturate the atmosphere with electrically conductive light scattering particles and polymers, particles like aluminum, barium, strontium, manganese. These particles are then manipulated with extraordinarily powerful radio frequency microwave transmissions that can heat the upper layers of the atmosphere like the ionosphere, that are used to create pressure zones that steer upper level wind currents, which then steer weather systems. These particulates, when they are manipulated with these frequencies, can literally move air masses. This is an integral part of climate engineering that is not known or being acknowledged by many. Extraordinarily powerful and dangerous radio frequency microwave transmissions. And if frequencies do that to particulates, again, what's it doing to us? What's it doing to the web of life? Given anything that's alive has water in it in some form or another, what's happening to us with this? And watch what happens to a flow of water when it's exposed to frequency. Very hard to believe, and when you feel that with particulates, the effect is even more profound. Then he asked this question: can cyclones, can hurricanes be manipulated? The short answer is yes. Project Cirrus. The U.S. military has been engaged in hurricane manipulation programs since at least 1947. And these programs have been ongoing ever since, although the U.S. military denies it. They claim they stopped this research. That is a blatant lie. Geoendangeringwatch.org has captured film footage of the radio frequency transmissions being used to manipulate the atmospheric particulates sprayed by climate engineering operations in order to steer and direct hurricanes. They can be manipulated to a degree that few can comprehend. We have NASA satellite images available at geoendangeringwatch.org that show extraordinary atmospheric manipulation off the west coast of Africa, where cyclones in the Atlantic basin originate. There's no theory, there's no hypothesis, there's no conjecture. Cyclone manipulation is absolutely, positively being done. There's a radio frequency transmitter that, based on the signal transmission direction, is isolating precipitation and blocking out a whole section of precipitation. These are one of the radio frequency transmitters, and they're being put up all over the country, all over the world, wherever the grid power will support them. Again, you saw the radio frequency transmission carving out a 90-degree inside corner. That's the overall effect in the end. Completely unnatural. There's not a meteorologist that doesn't know this is going on. No chance.
Electromagnetic fields are energy sources, and they're going to be interacting with moisture in the air or our bodies or whatever. And therefore, it's not at all surprising that you're going to find some movement in relation to exposure of weather patterns to electromagnetic fields.
The Air Force has gotten great value out of HAARP in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we're interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HAARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it. And, but that work has been completed.
You have things like HAARP that can send electromagnetic waves into the air column. If you send, lower frequencies, you can calm it all down and you can cool it. Or you can excite it and you can heat it up. So there's complete control of temperature within the environment.
You can create high pressure domes. In the northern hemisphere, that creates a clockwise spin, just like the pulley. That allows them to steer the upper level winds into nearly any configuration they wish. So the areas that are under that high pressure dome fry. They fry. Take a look at that round bubble. Is that not telling? That's a high pressure dome parked right over the top of us that ensures nothing can flow in. You would never see this meteorologically 20 years ago, never.
All around the world, from the savannas of Africa to remote islands in the Pacific, there is a mass extinction brewing.
All right, start counting. Elephant 7.
Species are vanishing at roughly 100 times the normal rate. If current trends continue, African elephants could be extinct in as few as 20 years, and coral reefs gone soon after that. The insects that pollinate our food are in trouble, as are these plastic-filled birds. In all, biologists fear the unthinkable. 3/4 of all known species could disappear. We've never seen anything like this. In all of Earth's history, there have only been 5 mass extinction events, one of which killed the dinosaurs. Now, biologists say we are on the verge of the 6th. What are we doing to cause this?
It was finally admitted to by mainstream sources that we are entering the 6th great mass extinction. That's what the mainstream story was, but we're not entering that level of an event. We are very, very far into the curve for the 6th great mass extinction. So much so that, as I've mentioned in the past, the species extinction rate pushing 300 a day right now, and in the last 40 years, we've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife population, 60%, while human populations have doubled. So we're not just entering the 6th great mass extinction. We are very, very far into that at this point. So what people need to see and understand, the headlines they see that they think seem dire, whether it's related to the climate or the rate of biosphere implosion, are in fact, in most if not all cases, far short of how severe the situation really is.
Right. Oh, and you know what? We should start at the basics for people that are new to the subject, for people that have not heard about it. Can you just explain briefly what climate engineering, what geoengineering is?
Geoengineering is the attempt by governments around the globe to play God with the weather, to intervene in Earth's climate systems in the attempt to tech their way out of the damage already done to the planet from human activity. This is the stated purpose. We must understand that weather manipulation, climate manipulation, has been used for over 70 years as a form of warfare, a very covert, devastating form of warfare. So although we have governments around the globe pretending they're trying to do something for the common good that couldn't be further from the truth. And the attempt to manipulate Earth's climate and life support systems leads to an unimaginably long list of cataclysmic downstream effects. Right. Only harm can come from this. Only harm has come from this.
A whole lot of hidden geoengineered aerosols going in west of California, and this is strictly to maintain the California and Nevada drought. Aerosols laid here, and look how this is dried out. Aerosols laid here, and look how this is dried out. And water vapor, in this case, is showing up the aerosols really nicely here. This is earlier. You know, for people that don't realize this is going on, I mean, it's really quite a horrific thing to see. These are all man-made right here, and these are man-made. And again, this is going to build this high pressure so they can maintain the California drought. Okay, these are definitely aerosols. And then here's the little patch we saw this morning, how it's held together and moving eastward, inhibiting the rain as it goes. The stakes here. This is the stakes. I showed you the dry air over this part of California. Well, look at this. This is exceptional drought here. Unbelievable drought. And it extends into bear country here. And they're maintaining this. This is a maintenance exercise. These aerosols today are principally being used to reinforce this drought and continue it. Total precipitation. And look how California has been left out. This light blue means nothing. 1/4 of an inch. That doesn't even matter when you're in a drought. Hits the ground and 10 minutes later it's evaporated. So it looks like this little part of California got about over an inch. That's just barely in the corner. Just terrible.
Marlar's job is to change weather, although he won't say it that way.
But we're really not changing the overall picture of the weather in the Sierra Nevada, with the exception of causing a little more snowfall over some of the watersheds. 5 to 10% additional water on an annual basis.
But others use different methods, including airplanes to scatter tiny particles of silver iodide to seed clouds.
Most of the watersheds of the Sierra Nevada are cloud seeded by someone.
Even more worrying, perhaps, are the true unknown environmental ramifications of the long-term effects of these technologies on our environment. Ironically enough, those who are warning us of the potentially disastrous consequences of man-made climate change may be exactly right in their assessment after all. But in the end, it may not be the man-made CO2 they're worried about that is the real culprit of this coming catastrophe, but the geoengineering technologies that are being proposed as the solution to this problem.
The disgrace that our government is allowing the US to spray barium, aluminium and all sorts of toxic aerosol chemicals under the banner of repelling sunlight.
Critics equate the program to the 1950s radioactivity experiments using human guinea pigs.
Health implications, right? Let alone the disorganised weather patterns leading to less rainfall. Much like dead paddocks with dead biology won't attract rain like a living pasture will.
And even though it's April Fool's Day, we can only hope this joke's not on us.
We could see these obvious patterns that were being laid out in the sky. We were really thankful for the opportunity to be able to get up to altitude, that we could observe these materials and sample that cloud layer. Our intention was to do a point-to-point sampling mission where we could actually reach altitudes, approaching 20,000 feet. Unfortunately, on our flight from BWI to Albany, the layer that we observed was at 27,000 feet, and I think we made it to about 23,000 feet perhaps, and so we were below that confluent layer that we observed. We landed, had lunch, they refueled the plane.
We have two blank control samples. One was taken prior to the flight, one was taken after the flight. So we should have, again, two blank samples and actually three samples, one on ascent, one at level flight, and then slight ascent from 17,000 to 21,000, and then changed the filter and took another sample, a third sample, as we descended.
And then on the return mission, though, we noticed that that cloud layer had descended from 25 or 27,000 feet to about 17,000 feet. So we could easily reach through that, and we sampled below the cloud layer, and I'm saying cloud, I mean an induced cloud layer. We sampled through that confluent layer and above it.
Electron microscopy. Scanning electron microscopy will provide information about particle size distribution. We will be able to get some elemental analysis. What really this technique is for is to prioritize our samples for downstream, more advanced imaging, more high-resolution imaging, especially by transmission electron microscopy. Put on a fresh pair of gloves. We're going to start with sample number 8. This is a blank that was collected on the return flight. No flow through this filter, so this filter should be free of any particulates. I'm going to use these scissors and forceps that have been cleansed with isopropanol and then acetone, and wipe free with these dust-free cloths. These are the series of samples that we're interested in. These are samples number 9, 10, and 11. These were taken on the return flight where the plane passed through an induced cloud layer. Number 10, I believe, is the one that was passed through a cloud layer at around somewhere between 17 and 19,000 feet. I will take time to cleanse the instruments between each sampling. Preparing sample number 9, near the center. Opening it to ensure that the surface that had received the particulates is facing upward. Number 9 is completed. Now processing sample number 10. One additional sample. This blank sample was taken after the plane landed, and 3 of the samples containing actual airflow particulates had been collected. So we have one prior to the mission and one at the conclusion of the mission. Prior to imaging, these samples are coated with a thin layer of platinum. The platinum helps to take the excess charge or electrons and drain them off to the stub. And now we'll do the samples where we pass through the cloud layer.
A few little bright particles. This particle here is probably the one that we'll do the most analysis on.
So the general image that we're seeing now are the glass fibers from the glass fiber filter itself, and the bright particles or bright areas that we see are areas operating in the so-called backscatter mode of this microscope, collects electrons that are backscattered, especially from metal center compounds. But you can clearly see the lighter and darker contrasted areas there, suggesting that it's an aggregate.
Some of the smaller particles in here we're looking at on the order of about 450 nanometers long. But there's also smaller particles in there too. So backscattered electrons, typically the higher the atomic number, the brighter the signal. That being said, what we will do is look for the bright spots and then analyze those. The glass itself does seem to have sodium in it. Looks like aluminum, sodium, silicon, calcium, potassium. So the reason that caught my eye is because it's darker than everything else. And it's got lots of small particles in it.
Yep. And this gives us a lot of information. Again, it identifies which filters have qualitatively more materials, just, basically we see more material on it. It also gives us information about size of particles and potential for aggregates that we might be dealing with in the samples.
Barium sulfide again?
So barium sulfide is interesting. What he's doing now is just getting a higher resolution image of it to see if this is indeed a single particle or if there's any evidence that there's an aggregate of smaller particles.
So really the big standout in this one seems to be iron. In this field we have one there, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
And I did analysis on all of them. They all seem to be pretty similar in composition.
Yeah.
Well, this is definitely made up of much smaller particles.
Yeah.
So this may be a clump of what you're looking for. We just analyzed 3 different areas. This particle seems to be high in aluminum. It's a large flake though. And this has some silver too.
Yeah, in terms of now the aluminum signatures that we're getting from the glass fibers themselves, this
is much bigger.
Much bigger.
So look at that.
Yeah, that's the aluminum.
It's easily 3x the silicon.
Yep.
And I think the silicon and aluminum are pretty similar in the glass. So here, if you look at just the glass fiber, silicon is significantly taller than aluminum. So that particle there is mostly aluminum.
Yeah.
So measuring this one right here, this is below 70 nanometers.
Right. Good. In the precipitation samples that we've seen in the past, the aluminum oxide particles that we've been seeing are on the order of 40 to 60 nanometers. So that's consistent with the size that we've seen from precipitation events. Again, these samples were collected directly from the air. There's not a lot of approaches or instrumentation that you can use to observe these nanomaterials. I mean, again, these are the sizes of viruses. And so really the only equipment or instrumentation that is appropriate for identifying these materials is high-resolution transmission electron microscopy. This allows us not only to determine the size of the particles, we can also determine the composition using a technique called elemental dispersive spectroscopy. It's done within this large microscope. So it will give us information about the morphology of the particles, the composition of the particles, and we can actually see the crystalline spacing, so the spaces of the crystals themselves. So we are talking high resolution microscopic techniques that are really the only way to be able to observe these directly. Morphology is important because the productions of these materials are really of a constrained size range, and we've seen this already in samples that we've analyzed from other sources. American Element produces lots of these nanomaterials, and you can actually purchase them online. The size distribution of these engineered particles are quite homogeneous.
What we get? Ooh, it's like there's aluminum. Now what I've done is tell it to calibrate to the aluminum peak. So now what it's doing is going through each of its process times and each of its gating values and calibrating. Oh man. I can tell you this much. What I'm seeing right now is far superior to the last time I ran that calibration. So you see you got two calciums, right? Yeah. All right.
Hello, I want to show some new ionospheric heater activity out in the Pacific that may well be signaling a new approach by the U.S. Navy in that they are shying away from heating the ionosphere directly and moving towards just smoking the, heating the cloud tops because of the high ultraviolet that's been killing the plankton in the ocean. So I'm not trying to make an excuse for them, but what I'm seeing on these maps, on the satellite images, indicates a lot of long straight lines that are anomalous. And in fact, here's one that's an absolute stunner. If any meteorologists watch this, please, maybe you could have a look at this time slot.
But it's a science that is born out of a murky and troubled past.
Tragedy, sudden and appalling, descends upon the little seaside resort of Lynmouth.
In 1952, a freak storm destroyed a sleepy Devonshire village.
This was the main street of Lynmouth only a few days ago.
The storm led to catastrophic flooding that destroyed the town and killed 35 people. It was the most destructive storm in British history. But was it a natural one? Within days of the catastrophe, there were rumours of secret experiments. Rumours which the Met Office and the Ministry of Defence flatly denied. Then a witness came forward. A glider pilot, Alan Yates, now deceased, told a BBC journalist that just prior to the Lynmouth flood, he had taken part in a government-sponsored cloud seeding experiment.
We'd assembled at Cranfield in Bedfordshire in mid-August 1952, studying clouds. On the day I'm recalling, the weather was superb, but the cotton wool cumulus clouds were growing everywhere, and it was decided to make them rain.
Yates told the journalist that he and his colleagues had seeded clouds over the Bedfordshire countryside and had witnessed the effects for themselves.
I circled down between the clouds, still doggedly noting temperature, height, time, and the rest. Eventually, far below, I saw a sodden-looking countryside. Toasts were drunk to meteorology. They'd certainly made it rain.
Recently declassified documents have confirmed that the experiment, codename Operation Cumulus, took place in the first 2 weeks of August and coincided with the heaviest rainfall in Bedfordshire for many years. The experiment was heralded as a resounding success, until the rain continued to spread west, across the country, and into Devon. More than 50 years after the event, it is impossible to say if cloud seeding really did trigger the most destructive storm in British history, or if it was just an unfortunate coincidence. What is clear is that the government, anxious not to be blamed, closed the project down and denied it had ever taken place. A decade after the Lynmouth disaster, research on cloud seeding was to continue, this time in the United States, with Project Storm Fury.
Project Storm Fury assembles a team of highly trained scientists and technicians to fly into mature hurricanes.
They were hoping to use the technology to weaken hurricanes. What the Storm Fury scientists didn't realize, however, was that their research had caught the eye of the military. Dr. Joanne Simpson was one of the pioneers of Project Storm Fury. She was to find out only much later that the military were developing her techniques and using them as a weapon of war.
I thought it was terrible. I mean, all my life I've tried to work for the betterment of the planet and the people, even in a small way, and then to use what I've done as some kind of a military thing, I obviously am very concerned and not happy about it.
At that time, the United States Army were in Vietnam, struggling against the Viet Cong, an elusive guerrilla army. The Pentagon were desperate to explore anything that might give them an edge. So when military planners suggested that cloud seeding might trigger massive downpours and flood the Viet Cong's main supply routes, the government were quick to respond. Pierre Saint-Amand was part of the team assembled in a top-secret cloud seeding operation known simply as Project Popeye.
They say it will disrupt the precipitation pattern over Asia and parts of Europe, but they don't mention the U.S. because they feel, and it seems correctly so, that the U.S. population won't care as long as it doesn't disrupt their reign. But in fact, of course it's disrupting their reign. You can't engineer any part of the planet in regard to the climate and not affect the entire planet. Here's another excerpt from this 2008 Think Progress science report. They state this: pumping particles into the atmosphere to mimic the cooling effect of large volcanic eruptions has been proposed as a last-ditch solution to combating climate change, but doing so would cause problems of its own, including potentially catastrophic drought, say researchers. What do we see over the western U.S., what we've just seen over Australia, other parts of Europe, many regions around the world? We see unprecedented drought. That factor in overall reduction of global precipitation is impossible based on the laws of physics on a warming planet unless there's a factor we're not being told about. And that factor is climate engineering, the desiccant particulates that are not only destroying the ozone layer, but that are completely derailing the Earth's hydrological cycle. And all of this, Ray, even that alteration of atmospheric relative humidity, along with the particles and the oxidative effect they have on elements in the atmosphere, all of that has grave ramifications for the ozone layer itself, does it not?
Absolutely, Dean. When oxygen is at the top of atmosphere and is bombarded by the UVC radiation, it actually splits the oxygen O2 into O1s, and they meet up with other O2s and combine to form an O3, which is ozone. And then it becomes a shield against the very same harmful radiation that caused the ozone to exist in the first place. With the geoengineering that's going on right now, with the particulates up there, yeah, they're radiating some of this, reflecting some of this radiation back into space. But what they're doing is they're destroying more ozone in the process. The particulate aerosols being injected into our atmosphere by the current geoengineering programs inhibit the ability of oxygen to reach the top of atmosphere by stripping the free-form oxygen molecule from the atmosphere before it even reaches 60,000 feet. The upper ozone layer is created at the top of atmosphere, which can be anywhere from 80,000 feet on up, depending on atmospheric currents. Yet all pollution in our atmosphere will strip oxygen from the atmosphere. Free-form oxygen, as O2, is a very small, light molecule and is easily attracted to larger, heavier molecules. By molecular attraction of those heavier molecules and atmospheric electrostatic attraction, it is being stripped from the atmosphere by those larger molecules. And when it combines with another molecule, the oxygen molecule can no longer reach the upper atmosphere to form ozone. Remember that ozone is created by solar UVC radiation, so no ozone is created at nighttime. Whatever holes in the ozone layer that exist during the daylight hours will exist at night also, and with atmospheric currents will eventually affect a thinning of the entire upper ozone layer over a period of time. There is only one solution. Stop geoengineering.
For several months now, we've been seeing strange pulse wave patterns emanating from Antarctica that appear to be feeding into our jet stream. And there are a lot of theories about what's really going on down there because for all intents and purposes, most of Antarctica is closed off to the general public. But after all we've read about it, the only thing that we're really sure of is that the majority of everyone has never been told the full story of what is really happening down there. But this is something we came across during our research for the Antarctica video that we put together. It's another breadcrumb we've been left with. What people don't realize today about weather modification and control is that this was something being openly discussed and widely celebrated during the Cold War, especially in the late 50s and throughout the 60s. Full control of the Earth's climate was an openly stated goal right alongside space travel when they first started talking about all these things that they were going to be able to do after World War II. All of the stuff that the Club of Rome began blaming on the rest of us in the 1970s, everything from ozone depletion to climate change to negatively impacting the flora and the fauna, can also be traced back to widespread government weather modification experimentation and military rocket and nuclear bomb testing dating back to the 50s and 60s and warned about by Dr. Harry Wexler just before his untimely death in 1962. Today, we see things like this.
Buildings have collapsed. There are reports from New Orleans of people trapped in buildings that have come down around them.
Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, has been hit by a major earthquake.
Earthquake in Japan, a powerful quake.
The tsunami has engulfed several cities.
This is the moment Japan's nuclear disaster began.
Interrupt regular programming to bring you this weather alert.
There is a tornado on the ground in the southern portions of Joplin, just to the south of our station here.
We're told all the time that human beings are the cause for all the environmental woes, and thus we have no other choice than to turn over our trust to the government for global geoengineering experiments to commence. And although we will likely never be told how far weather modification and control experimentation went, or where those experiments are at today, when you see something like this coming up from Antarctica, just realize that they've only been talking about using that still mostly off-limits continent for planetary weather control since the 1950s, and warnings against the possible irreparable damage of widespread weather modification and geoengineering from someone who was there during all of that early experimentation and who went down in history as one of the greatest meteorologists the US has ever had, were ignored.
My last video was in terms of the anomalies on the Mimic map. We've got a lot of them. I've been covering this for years, and we've known that these are drawing back to a region in Antarctica. But because they want to cut out Antarctica on a lot of these maps, we can never see exactly where they're triangulating back to, the exact base. Now we know there's mystery bases that they're not going to list, like the ones on these islands here and other remote places in the ocean. But I got to give a shout out to Jim that put together a great tool here, Climate Viewer, in tracking all these locations. And what this allows us to do is to connect the dots and to finally see the bigger picture of what's going on here around the globe in terms of weather modification on a global grand scale. Once again, shout outs to Jim, shout outs to Kart Racer. I'll leave links for all that below so you guys can check out these sites and their work. But pertaining to the situation here, it's got to be known that there is a facility right here where we're tracking these waves back to. Literally, drawing a line right back to the heart of the situation is this facility. It is a super darn facility. That is what it's dubbed, and it is massive. It is there to affect the atmosphere. Right next to it, believe it or not, is what they dub the grandfather of HAARP. So some people only ever hearing of HAARP, some still not really understanding what it's for. It's for weather modification. It's for heating up the ionosphere, hitting it with a blast of energy, and then you can manipulate the weather. Where they're saying it's now closed and buried underneath the snow. But until we see proof of otherwise, anything could be going on here. A lot of these bases were top secret until exposed one way or another. So they let the information out that they were there, especially in terms of different satellite imagery, things like that. But some bases are completely hidden and off the record, and they're not going to be on this map. They also have these platforms out in the ocean that they move around. They're mobile, that help do the same thing in certain instances. But we have proof, finally, right here, that we have an array that's set up specifically for manipulating the atmosphere, where we have proof via other images, high-frequency waves, UHF, different frequencies being caught here. Now we know they're related. Most people have only heard of HAARP. If you look at the one in Peru, it dwarfs HAARP. It is a monster. If you go on up here to the United States, well, along the way, you're going to see question marks, which, like I said, there's facilities around the globe that we know are top secret. We just don't have solid proof of. But you're going to come to find out that there's other facilities. Ion colliders. You hear of CERN. Well, they have the same things going on here in this country, most people completely unaware. I've talked about Fermilabs, everything in Illinois. You have this right here. You have this here, 2 different locations. But sticking to weather modification, this is really the kicker and the game changer for anyone that needs to see what's going on here. Out at the edge of the islands in Puerto Rico, the same Puerto Rico that got hammered by a hurricane, right here at the heart of Hurricane Alley, before these hurricanes really start to hit any mainland or any life, so to speak, coming in from the ocean, guess what we have? We have a massive HF ionospheric heater, ladies and gentlemen. You heard me right. It's not secret anymore. It's known. It's out there. Megahertz, everything that it runs off, all the megawatts, the whole setup is explained right here. They have an ionospheric heater, which if you blast the eye wall of a hurricane with heat, what do you get? You get fuel. You supercharge it. And when you can drape a net over the whole region, they can manipulate this big time. Now, watch this pattern over here I just covered in my other video. It hits the Great Lakes, which means that this blip that you're seeing stretched clear across the United States. You're just not seeing it because the map's not showing you. See that pattern? See all those waves coming from out in the middle of the ocean? For what it would seem, they stretch all the way across the United States, all the way up there. You just don't see anything on the white part of the map. It's kind of deceptive in that manner. So all of this going across the United States at the exact moment that Florence makes landfall. Watch it. Right there, as soon as it hits the coastline, that eye wall, the whole thing sees a big zap. So you now have proof. Anytime anyone wants to debate or speculate, or maybe they're just curious and they want to know what's really going on with weather manipulation, they want to know some facts. They want to know some solid, hardcore proof, evidence that there's some stations set up out here and that we're actually seeing something in the skies. Well, you've got it. right here. You can connect both hand in hand, because they go hand in hand, with all of this. Got to give a shout out to everyone out there that plays their part in getting the truth out there, because we're in this together. Once again, though, these are all over the place and in one of the most crucial places on the whole planet that affects us. You have an ionic heater. A heater, for crying out loud, that is adding fuel to these storms. And there's no telling how many other facilities are all along the way that are hidden, that they do not speak of. This one and these setups are key to me. I'm going to leave a link. Make sure to check everything out. Stay tuned for more. Here's your proof. It's been Dabu7.
Stunningly beautiful beams of sunlight would glisten down through the kelp stalks, rising up from so far below me. It was like being in the canopy of a long-lost medieval forest. Weaving my way through the massive kelp stalks in total silence, I felt like a wild and free bird flying through an untouched and unspoiled paradise of unimaginable beauty. So many species, all playing their individual part in the miraculous web of life. Seals, making their way through the kelp, would often alter their course, and they would swim up to me and stare right into my mask, directly into my eyes. They were curious. Many of my memories from the kelp forests now seem a very distant dream from another life. Moments that I knew, even while they were occurring, were slipping away. It was beautiful. It was nature. A part of the living ocean. A part of the web of life on which our lives depend. I had to leave that life. There was a constant calling of conscience inside me. I felt there was much I had to do, that there was a long journey before me, yet to be traveled. The deepest and most untraveled wilderness has always been my sanctuary, and when I trek there alone and in solitude, I feel most connected to the whole. I marvel at the complexity and the miraculousness of life, the countless forms of it. I try to contemplate the endless and seemingly impossible factors that were necessary for life to exist and flourish on this spinning ball of rock in the harsh and hostile environment of space. A ball of rock with its own magnetic shield, with its own moon that stabilizes its orbit, that orbits a life-giving star at just the right distance, with miraculous atmospheric layers that, for unimaginably long spans of time, have facilitated countless forms of life. How wondrous it all is, each part. A dragonfly, a tree, a bird, a whale, the sunrise, millions of tons of water magically floating through the sky in the form of spellbindingly beautiful clouds, bringing life-giving rain. When I witness the destruction of this miraculous web of life, I can only think of returning to the front line of the battle to sound the alarm. Reaching a critical mass of awareness in the population is the only way forward in this fight.
The challenges we face are immense. The odds are against us. But as the proverb goes, it's not over till it's over. Any one of us could be the final pebble that triggers the landslide of awakening.